Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me once again Doug Casey. Doug is a well-known libertarian thinker who is also a prolific writer and best-selling author, and he's also a very successful international investor. He is also a very entertaining speaker with provocative but highly valuable insights and thoughts. You can reach Doug and learn more about him at caseyresearch.com. But you're not going to want to miss these next few minutes with Doug Casey. Welcome, Doug, and thanks for joining me again. Doug, I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about an article that you recently wrote. I thought it was really quite good, actually. It was comparing the 1930s and today. First of all, thanks to the ongoing propaganda from our major media, most Americans believe that comparing the 1930s today is ridiculous. I mean, the idea is that the Federal Reserve and its ability to print endless amounts of money guarantees us avoidance of anything like the 1930s. But, of course, some of us that realize that you can't just create money by printing digits or printing paper beg to differ with that, and I know that you certainly don't agree with the notion of printing money to prosperity. But how do you respond to that conventional wisdom? What would you tell the average Joe who comes up and says, "Well, that's just really ridiculous, Doug. We can't go into another depression"?
Well, yes. First, we want to define what a depression is, and I like to define. Well, there are several good workable definitions of a depression, and usually when people use that term, they never define it. They just expect that everybody knows what a depression is. It's kind of like the 1930s, everybody thinks. A depression is a period when most people's standard of living drops significantly, or it can also be a period of time when the business cycle climaxes. Okay, now, where are we? This depression, and I've actually got to go back further than this. Uh-huh. I mean, what I like to look at is the really long-term view. And from that point of view, I'd say Westerns, forget about this greater depression. Yeah. We are now entering upon. Let's go back even further. Western civilization itself, I think, peaked before World War I. And the civilization, as opposed to the technology, which has been getting better and better, fortunately, and is still accelerating, peaked about 1914. And American civilization, I think, peaked in the mid-50s. With the 59 Cadillac, and the U.S. was on top of the world, all the skyscrapers, all the airplanes, everything. And I would say that the standard of living of the average American has been going down since about 1971 in real terms. And now, since 2007, I'd say we entered upon what I call the Greater Depression, which is going to be much worse and much different and much longer lasting than the unpleasantness of 1939 to 1946. And there are going to be a lot of differences, which I guess you hinted at and I was going to talk about. Like the last depression was a catastrophic deflation. Right. Where for a while the dollar became more valuable because the stock market and the bond markets crashed. And so what happened? The real estate market crashed. Banks went out of business. So a lot of dollars were wiped out. The remaining dollars were worth more. This time, that's still possible, but this time it's likely to be an inflationary depression because of the trillions and trillions of new currency units the U.S. and every other government in the world is creating now.
Well, it certainly is true, but on the other hand, money now is created with debt. So what we're seeing, I know, Doug, is that debt is growing almost exponentially. Debt of all manner is growing exponentially, whereas income, if it's growing at all, and that's debatable, I think, in the United States, depending on how you count inflation, whether real GDP is positive or negative. But assuming it is positive, it's even by the establishment's calculations, it's very negligible. It's 1%, 2%, 3%, not even 3% during the Obama years. So I'm wondering if there may not be a chance for a replay of that deflation, given this massive amount of debt that is choking off growth and choking off the standard of living of average people. The average people, we see the wealth being, I think, sent up to the 1%, the top 1/10 of 1%. And Doug, I would have no problem with that if that 1% were being legitimately earned instead of through some sort of, say, fascist arrangements where the bankers are basically picking the pocket of anybody that produces anything of value. But do you think deflation, you're not ruling that out, I guess. You're just saying, given the ability to print endless amounts of money, you're betting that the politicians will probably find a way to get that into the hands of the masses in exchange for their votes and avoid a deflationary depression?
Yeah, I think that's likely to be the way it comes down. But you're quite correct, Jay. It's that we could have another catastrophic deflation because all this debt, if it can't be serviced, what happens to the money? It dies and goes to money heaven. It disappears. So that's entirely possible. And, this debt is very, very serious because some people owe it to other people. And the other thing about debt is that when you have positive savings, it means that you're producing more than you consume and you're setting aside the difference. That's what savings are.
Sure.
But when you have debt, it means that you're consuming more than you're producing and you're borrowing the capital from somebody else that saved it, or you're mortgaging your future, either one. So that's why debt is really very serious at this point.
Well, it seems to me, Doug, that debt is just really, the creation of money out of debt, which is almost seems to be infinite, is really destroying capital. David Stockman, I think, made the point, and anybody that knows anything about economics and free market economics would understand that by not allowing price discovery for capital, you're destroying capitalism. So we have, zero interest rates for prolonged periods of time. How can this system continue on, Doug, without self-destruction if you can't really have capitalism? It seems to me, would you agree that we're in the process of destroying capitalism through the monetary system?
Oh, there's no question. But, capitalism itself has become a word without meaning because real capitalism is a total free market in businesses and it's an unregulated market. Mm-hmm. But today, everything is regulated. So it's actually a fascist system, one where the state and corporations are hooked up, and you just have, the appearance of capitalism because you can still buy and sell things. So I hate to even use that word. Mm-hmm. It's become degraded, like so many words that it's used today improperly.
For sure. People on the left side of the political spectrum use capitalism, and I think they don't have a clue about what capitalism is, real free market capitalism, and so I agree with you there. But, Doug, let's go back to this issue of deflation or inflation and what that might mean in terms of how we invest our money. During the 1930s, deflation was actually a very good time for gold mining companies, for example. And I think perhaps because the cost of getting the gold out of the ground was declining relative to the price of gold. Do you agree with that? Generally speaking, would you see a deflationary environment good for gold miners?
Good question, because I see gold itself as a crisis hedge much more than an inflation hedge per se. But let's talk about the gold mining business for a moment.
Yeah.
The gold mining business has been very, very good to me, but it's a crappy business. It's a 19th century choo-choo train business. And even in the 1930s, if you found a gold deposit, you could put it into production without too much aggravation. Today, it'll take 10 years from the time that you find it, and it's hard enough to find because the world itself is very picked over these days. And after you find it and put it into production, the taxes are much higher, the environmental and other regulations are much higher, NGOs will make your life miserable, native groups. It's a horrible, low-margin business today. So I see the gold mining business as a speculative vehicle, not something you can really invest in.
Well, it's interesting to note, though, Doug, when you get a bull market in gold, the shares seem to do very, very well. I'm looking over the last several cycles. The TSX S&P Gold Index, for example, rose between 500 and 800% over a period of 5 years or so. But then, suddenly, within a very short period of time, it lost 80% of its value. So, and I know, talking to your friend Rick Rule and some people up at the Sprott organization up in Toronto recently, they were talking about this issue, and they noted that, in fact, as long as global GDP is in decline, the money printers will continue to push real interest rates downward and negative even as they are now. So, it seems to me I know I agree with you completely. It's a crappy business. It's a choo-choo train business, as you call it. And all the things you pointed out, it's getting harder and harder to find good deposits, more regulation, all the NGOs and native groups and all that stuff. Completely agree with you. And I've been through this business almost as long as you have, Doug, and I know it's painful at times, but it can be extremely rewarding at times. So how do you figure out that it's time to start lightening up your portfolio in gold shares and putting it somewhere else? What do you look for?
Well, you were quite correct when you said earlier that gold does move in an exaggerated way with the gold price. And the last peak was 2011 when gold was around $1,900 per ounce. And these stocks had really been howling since then. And they bottomed a year ago in like January of 2016. And they've come up a lot and they've been meandering around. Let's put it this way. I think we're moving into a new bull market for gold. And this bull market for gold is going to take it way above its past peak. It's going to go considerably over $2,000. And since most of these mining producers have costs of all-in sustaining costs, which is the way they gauge this now,
sure,
not just cash costs, $800, $900 an ounce, maybe $1,000, depends. It can be a very profitable industry for a while, excellent speculative vehicle over the next few years. So, yes, I'm long a lot of gold companies right now, and I'm very bullish on gold and on silver. And, in fact, on most commodities, the grains and the tropical products, and they're all pretty cheap right now since the last bull market peak of commodities in 2011.
Yeah, indeed. Michael Oliver, who we have on this show very frequently, has turned very bullish on the soft commodities as well, and sees gold leading the way, and the precious metals, sees silver outperforming gold. I guess you may see it that way as well in a bull market.
Very likely, because silver is a much smaller market than gold. It doesn't have all the gold that's ever been mined is still above ground. That's not true of silver. And it's a much smaller market. That makes it much more volatile. It's kind of a poor man's gold. So when the average guy gets the bit in his teeth and gets afraid of inflation, he'll tend to buy silver more than gold. So it's got, like gold, it's got new industrial uses every day. They're both high-tech metals, which a lot of people don't realize and don't think about. So, very bullish on silver.
I would like to talk a little bit about your book, The Speculator, because it ties in with gold share investing and so forth. Tell our listeners a little bit about your book, Doug. I know I have a copy of it in front of me here. It's a 420-page read. Very interesting read, very colorful. You're putting your skills together to really paint a picture of what this industry is all about. Talk to us a little bit about The Speculator and maybe whet the appetite of people to buy the book. Tell us a little bit about it so people go out and buy it.
Well, of course, every author wants every person to buy his book, so it goes without saying. But Speculator actually is an excellent book. It's a novel that traces our hero, Charles Knight, who starts out as a 23-year-old who gets lucky, makes a lot of money on a gold mining stock, and goes to Africa to check it out, to see if it's real. He finds that it's a gigantic fraud, and then gets involved with an African revolution with boy soldiers and all the rest of that. So it's the book is I intended it as an education in speculative techniques, basic economics, the gold mining industry, African politics, and a whole bunch of things. So it goes into all that stuff, but it's the first of a series of 7 books that are intended to show as our hero Charles Knight reforms the reputations of unjustly besmirched, highly politically incorrect occupations. Mm-hmm. So in the one that's coming out this July, Speculator came out last July, he is called Drug Lord, where Charles becomes a drug lord, and we explain the drug business, legal and illegal, the morality, the techniques, the effects, everything. And then next July, after this one, after the government steals all the money he makes in the drug business again, and puts him in jail, not to reveal too much of the plot, he becomes an assassin, where we talk about the history of assassinations and the techniques, and more importantly, in many ways, the morality of killing people that just need killing. And then it wraps up to the next one after that. But these things become more radical as time goes on. So let's say that Speculator is an easy gateway drug to the subsequent novels.
Well, very interesting. It should be a fun read, Doug. I believe a very interesting, fun read, but also The Speculator looks like it might actually be practical novel in the sense that it might help people who aren't haven't spent as much time in this industry as you and I have to sort of understand or get a sense of what the risks are in this industry.
Yes, because listen, reading a book on geology or a book on economics or the theory of speculation, a nonfiction book is hard work, but this book is easy and fun to read, and you're going to absorb hundreds of pieces of important data. That's why people should read it. It's available at Amazon, or they can get a signed by both me and my co-author, John Hunt, who's a medical doctor who, like a lot of medical doctors, is getting tired of practicing medicine.
Sure.
So we're doing these things together. They can go to highgroundbooks.com and get a hardback copy that's autographed by both of us, or they can get a softback on Amazon, either one.
All right. Well, I recommend that people do that. I think it'd be definitely a very enjoyable read and an educational read. Doug, with the time I have left, I'd like to get in a little bit, have you talk a little bit about what's transpiring down in Argentina. I know that you live down there a good part of your time. You have put together a wonderful investment property down there for people to go to. It's really I would say like a 5-star residential place that gives people a sort of a secluded lifestyle, I would say, in some ways, in northern Argentina. Talk to us a little bit about that project that you've been involved with over the last number of years, as well as Argentinian politics, which I understand have improved for free market folks.
Yes. Argentina has had a major turnaround in the last year with the election of their new president, Mauricio Macri. And I would say that he is probably the best guy running any nation state in the world, any country in the world. I mean, this isn't to say that, he's like John Galt or something. He's not, but he's really better than anybody else. And he's made a lot of changes in this country that are very, very favorable. And it's been a help. I started this resort down here. It's in the grape-growing region of northwest Argentina. So we're surrounded by grapevine mountains, and it's very beautiful. But we're in the middle of nowhere. You can ride your horse for days in any direction and not see the human being once you get there. But we have everything that a civilized person might possibly want in a small town with a beautiful plaza in the middle. And that's why I built it down there, because I'm afraid in the U.S., politics have become so viscerally hateful, where people are lined up against each other. This is like a prelude to a civil war in the U.S. Very serious.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. And so I'd like to ask you a little bit about how you plan to, or how your estate down there, your residential area that people can go and invest in and live in, how they might be safer. Certainly, I guess maybe just living in another country. I mean, we're at ground zero here in America. I live in New York, and I agree with you completely. I've never seen such division and such hatred over issues that, well, I think it's, they're very important fundamental issues about government, what you believe government should or shouldn't do. And it seems as though the majority of folks here think that government should do endless amounts of things, almost playing God, replacing God in some ways, I suppose, in the minds of many people. And I know that you don't agree with government doing much of anything. In fact, if you had your way, there would be no government. And your estate down there, your quarters that you've put together for people to live, is a wonderful place. I've been there. It's beautiful. I was wasn't there before it's finished. I presume it's a lot nicer now than it was when I was there. But, Doug, we're hearing about cashless societies. We're hearing about increased government control of our lives in every which way. Are you hopeful that somehow Argentina, and especially at your residence down there, you can avoid that you can live relatively free? That's always been your goal, I know.
Well, look, when you buy a house down here, and people really should come down and visit us. In fact, Jay, you should be living down here too, because you've got dry, sunshine, cool nights, 330 days of the year. I mean, we've got one of the best gymnasiums and spas anywhere in the world, quite frankly, and the golf course and the polo field and the riding trails and the food and all this type of thing. Listen, you should be down here. You don't have to be a movie park at this point. Anybody that's in a position to, but you've got to diversify your assets. Everybody does.
Yeah.
Internationally and politically, because your big risk, as serious as the market risks are, and they're really serious today, your biggest risk is a political risk. It's what your government will do to you. And it may be impossible in the years to come to diversify outside of the U.S. You won't be able to have a crib someplace else in the world unless you're out. So
yeah, I could definitely see that happening. So I guess your message is get out while the getting's good, or at least diversify while you're able to do so. I'd like to get your opinion here with the next. I guess we have 5 minutes or so left here yet, Doug. But with respect to Donald Trump, quite a character he is, and boy, he's really shown some great intestinal fortitude the way he handles the establishment. I kind of wonder if he's not asking for some big trouble. But in any event, David Stockman, who we have on this show from time to time, has talked about how Trump has a place he sees, a useful place, in terms of sort of upsetting the apple cart, as it were. He sees Trump as intensifying this sort of dissension and conflict that you were just alluding to and talking about in America. And I think that Stockman sort of sees, just read a quote from David. He said, still this emerging White House train wreck is entirely welcome. As we have said all along, Trump's job is not to enact phony cures. We've had those for decades. He has been chosen by the fates to be the great disruptor and to bring the system to a crashing halt and America's fantasyland dwellers to a rude awakening. End of quote. What's your response to David's idea that perhaps Trump has a useful place in bringing the existing evil system down and a chance to build up something better?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Although I have mixed feelings about Trump, because he's not a libertarian, he's an authoritarian. But he's an authoritarian that has because he's a businessman also, he has some intelligent, commonsensical ideas. So, and the nice thing about him, which is what Stockman was saying, is that he's acted as a catalyst. He's crystallizing the differences between different types of Americans. The Americans that are socialists at heart and cupcakes and this type of thing, and traditional, kind of solid Americans. And they hate each other at this point. And I don't know where this is going to end, except that if the economy collapses this year or next year, and it's way overdue for rolling down the hill, Trump is going to be blamed for it. Even though it's the consequence of many years of mistakes. And I'm afraid if he's blamed for it, and since he's vaguely associated with capitalism and traditional America, that's going to leave the way open for a real leftist dictator-type person in 2016. So this is a very, very dangerous time for the U.S. This is the most dangerous time for the U.S. Since 1860.
Yeah, I could. That's sort of a internal conflict that is really brewing. There's no question about it. And people are just becoming totally illogical in their arguments. They're not even listening. They're not even thinking, and they're not allowing free speech on campuses. Everything. It's just everything America stood for seems to be basically being thrown out by the left side of the political spectrum. I think you meant that 2018 or 2017, 2018, I guess, is really, as you say, is really the disaster. The time that we have to be worried about, right? Right now, in fact.
The next election is 2020, excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm thinking 2016, I meant 2020.
Right, exactly. Well, and any time now. I mean, this equity market's been, I think, artificially held up for so long with easy money, cheap money. Let me ask you, Doug, with respect to interest rates, many of us have been thinking that rates have got to start rising sometime. And yet, the likes of Lawrence Summers and some of these people, they believe that we should continue to push forward negative rates and then, if need be, of course, go to a cashless society. Not need be, they're planning to go in that direction. Do you have fears of a cashless society, and how will we cope with that?
Yeah, well, Lawrence Summers and people like that, and Soros and so forth, I mean, he's a genuine criminal personality, quite frankly.
Sure.
And cash is vital to the privacy of any individual. If you cannot use cash, that means everything has to go in electronic credits through a bank, and they know exactly what you're doing, and they can control everything, including freezing your account. It's one of the things I like about this country is that you even buy $1 million house down here, chances are it's done with cash. Like a briefcase full of stuff. So I like that, but the trend towards the cashless society is a real potential disaster. And these low interest rates are very destructive for the average guy, because the average guy tries to save and get ahead. And what does he have to do? You save in dollars. But the dollars are losing value rapidly, and you can't get any interest on the dollars. Meanwhile, the rich guys are taking advantage of asset prices, which are being bulled up by all this. That's why the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer.
Absolutely. We were, as you pointed out, you said something like 1971 is when the average guy stopped, or when it was about as egalitarian as we've ever had it. The average person, a strong middle class we had, until, of course, 1971 was the year that Nixon took us off the international gold standard. Money was created, and the people that controlled and printed the money and controlled the money in government and so forth have been, I think, picking the pockets of average working stiffs, right?
Absolutely correct. And I don't know how the average guy out there feels about all of this, or if the average guy even understands exactly what's happening or knows what to do about it. So I'm afraid that the average guy is going to be blindsided when the economy takes a when it really heads down. I think this year, but certainly no later than next year. I think it's going to be very scary, quite frankly.
Oh, I'm afraid you're right, Doug, and I'm afraid we're basically out of time. One quick question then. If we have a hyperinflation, it seems to me owning gold, owning silver, owning tangibles is the thing to do. If we're going into a deflationary depression, what do we do then? Then I guess ideally cash would grow in value, but do you think the authoritarians will allow that to happen? And what should the average person do? Diversify, you suggested? Absolutely.
Well, the problem is that cash, $100 bills or 20s, these are an unsecured liability of a bankrupt government.
Right.
So I think whether we have a hyperinflation or whether it's a deflation, the answer lies in gold and silver coins in your own possession, because gold and silver, it's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. So whether it's inflation or deflation, you've got to have a significant part of your savings in those metals.
Of course, as you say, politics or the political system is the biggest issue, because it was during, I guess, the French Revolution, in which people that owned silver owned gold were beheaded, essentially, I believe. At least those that tried to use gold. So even if we have gold, Doug, and we have the wrong government, it might not work.
Yeah, there's no way out. So you want to keep your purchases of the metals quiet, keep them private. And it's a funny thing, you talk about the French Revolution. I would have been all for the revolution overthrowing Louis XVI. The only problem is that it was good to get rid of that corrupt monarchy, but then it got worse with Robespierre. and left the terror. And then it got worse with Napoleon. And that's what generally happens after revolutions. The same thing happened when they overthrew Tsar Nicholas II in Russia in 1917. It got worse with Lenin, and then it got much worse with Stalin. That's what happens after revolutions. So you have to be really afraid.
Well, I guess really afraid and move to your resort down there, Doug, I guess. But in any event, it's certainly an option for people that have the wherewithal. I want to thank you very much, Doug. We're out of time. I hope we can do this again. It's really fun. Always great to talk to you.
Jay, I look forward to it as well. Thank you.